One of the really nice things about this conference is that it reminds the authors that getting away from these three big countries is actually very important. And not only is what happens in Central Europe or in Poland important in its own right, but it also sheds light on the larger picture of European history as well. And I would say that moving away from this concentration on big narrative about these countries is actually a very positive step that opens up the kind of book that I work on to a variety of sort of different interpretations. It's very important to be here and to travel through Poland and Ukraine, because seeing these places just puts you in the place where things happened. And so you think about Warsaw's history as a Polish capital, as a center of modernity, as a cultural melting pot, and as we were talking about today, as the capital of the emerging Poland after World War I. And then you see the city, and then you think about what happened in World War II and how the city was destroyed. And you see how it was rebuilt. I think being on the ground is extremely important, and also meeting the people here and the people at the conference and just talking, even people like in the taxi drivers even have their stories to tell. So it's very important, I think, to be here. And I've traveled in Poland quite a bit, and I've always been very interested in Polish history, so it's not a big step for me to put Polish history in a book, but I've never been to Ukraine or Kyiv, and I'm looking very much forward to that, because again, I think when you're there, you see the layers of the city, the way the city was built across time, and you see the way these layers are sort of cemented in the architecture of the city, and it really helps you understand how to represent that to the readers of the book. A textbook like the one I work on goes out for reviews. The editors at the press enlist people who use the textbook, teachers who use the textbook, or sometimes people who don't use the textbook. And they will send the textbook to these readers, and they have a list of questions, sort of standard questions, and the readers will respond to those questions, right? And sometimes they're helpful, sometimes they're not, sometimes they're longer, sometimes they're shorter, but it rarely gets the sort of focused reading that your experts provide. I mean, the experts go in very, very deeply into the book. They're very careful. They give this page-by-page response. It's extremely useful. That doesn't mean that I necessarily agree with every single point that the experts make, but it's always worth thinking about, and they have comments ranging from errors of fact, just very basic errors of fact that are super important, to sort of alternate interpretations or questions about my interpretation. That stuff is just extremely useful to have somebody provide that. So it's actually a very great service to me and to the book to hear what the experts have to say. After the last conference, I did keep in touch with some people for a while, but since I'm more of a German historian, I'm not necessarily going to establish the kind of collegial networks that people who are writing monographs would. I think it's useful for me, but I think it's extremely useful for some of the other authors. So we were the colleague who was discussing, diplomacy about Poland today in the morning session. I could imagine that he would maintain contact with the experts who read his book. And I would do that to a certain extent, but I think that's probably more important for the people who are working on monographs than it is for me. That said, I welcome any kind of collaboration. I'm going to meet with Igor in Berlin when I go to Berlin after this and see the Polish Historical Institute there. So that's very interesting for me. And who knows what turns up out of that. Maybe I work with him on a conference or something at some point. It's hard to say, but it's also, frankly, good to see the other scholars in the room too, like the other American scholars, for instance, and to get to know them. And some of them I know before, and some of them I don't. So it's hard to say what comes out of it, but it could result in some useful collaboration later.